Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Story Secrets. I'm Father Roderick. I'm a priest and I'm a geek, and I love to share with you the deeper layers of the stories that we all love. And today we're going to talk about anime, and more specifically, I'm going to give you my review and my early thoughts. I have to say early because I have so many thoughts, and a lot of them haven't really crystallized yet. But I want to give you my initial review of the first season of Chainsaw Man. Now, if you're following me on TikTok, you know that actually my last TikTok video that I made last year, I haven't been doing new videos for a while because I've just been too busy, was about Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man is right now an anime series, but it is based on a long-running manga series, actually a very popular one. And this first season is based on the first story arc in this manga. The manga itself is a lot bigger, and a lot of the storylines have not yet been turned into an anime. But because of the popularity of this series, the author has approached an animation studio to translate his manga into an animated series, and it was a huge success. I watched it on Crunchyroll in the original Japanese version. There's also a dubbed version in English, although I think that with this particular story, I really preferred the original voice actors. I thought it worked a lot better than the English voices. Maybe also because this takes place in Japan, the story itself. So it feels a bit strange if you hear everyone speaking with an American accent, even though clearly the setting is Japan. So I've watched all the episodes. The first episode of the series, the introduction, was the basis for my first TikTok video. It was a long one. It was like 7 minutes, because I was immediately struck by the very strange combination of basically two worlds. The first one is a very gory, sometimes juvenile, extremely brutal, like zombie monster devil fantasy on the one hand, and on the other hand there were some story beats that were clearly inspired by the theme of death and resurrection, redemption and self-sacrifice, and that caught my interest because I like a challenge. I like it when I'm presented with a story that is a bit grating, that is not part of my world. As you know, I'm a huge fan of a lot of different stories. I love, fantasy, Star Wars, science fiction. I read a ton of books every year. But the world of anime and manga is, up until this moment, was kind of a closed world. And I didn't know where to begin. It's such a vast universe of different types of stories, different genres and subgenres. And it's only thanks to my TikTok audience that I came across a show like Chainsaw Man. But it all started, as you know, with Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is a somewhat older anime series. But that did the same. It was a combination of a specific anime genre about these, big robots, bit Gundam, these gigantic, towering King Kong-sized or Godzilla-sized robots fighting monsters, devils, angels in the case of Neon Genesis Evangelion. So that, on the one hand, a kind of fan favorite, typical Japanese storytelling genre, and then on the other hand, lots and lots of Christian symbolism, names, situations, themes that were brought into the story, not necessarily to tell a Christian story, by the way, but it's the exotic nature of Christianity and Western Christianity for the Japanese storytellers that makes them so fascinated by that. And so they just bring in all these elements, sometimes not even knowing why. But there's always a reason that an author or a storyteller or an artist is struck by a particular image or a particular theme. And my quest for Neon Genesis Evangelion was to figure out why. And I was very open-minded there. I wasn't doing a commentary on that series so I could use it to promote Christianity or whatever. No, I wanted to explore the story as it was, and then the background of the symbols and the themes that were used, and to see if there was some kind of connection, maybe in the mind of the author. And I believe that in Neon Genesis Evangelion there's ample proof that at least part of the people that worked on that series, that they knew what they were doing, even though none of them had a Christian background. But they did do some research. Otherwise, the connections are so obvious for me. But that's because I'm a biblical scholar, and I got quite a bit of flack from fans of the series, telling me that I was proselytizing. I was basically taking their favorite series and then turning it into a Christian apology in a certain way. But that has never been my aim, and it will never be my aim. But I knew, watching the series, that a lot of those symbols were used on purpose, because if you know what they mean, then you see how they fit into that particular story. And so the same thing applies to Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man is also challenging for me. I'm not into gore. I'm not into violence. Actually, there's one genre of movies that I never watch, and that's horror. I don't like slash horror. Everything has to do with demonic possession and all that stuff. And I don't know why. It's probably because as a kid, I was always a bit shy, and I wasn't very, I wasn't the brave hero. But I always, and there's also something in violent stories that I find repulsive. It makes me a bit afraid. I don't know. And so for me, this particular story of Chainsaw Man, dealing with lots of violence, there's a huge amount of fighting, and it's not just fighting with fists. It's fighting with chainsaws, with knives. You've got blood, zombies, limbs that are cut off. It is extremely, intestines that are flying through the air. Really, it's anything but an appropriate story for a priest to read. And yet, that is why it's so challenging, because I know that there's more to this story. Every story is told for a reason, even if it's a story in a language that you're not familiar with or something that you don't particularly like. But for me, the challenge is but is there more to this than just shock value? If Chainsaw Man was just about shock, I don't think it would have been as popular as it is. In fact, now that I've seen the first season, I've discovered, like many of the fans of the series, that there is much more nuance in this story, and that there is a fascinating mix of the exuberant, the gory, the shocking stuff, and very profound, almost poetic moments of deep emotional content, be it loss, love, even very fundamental questions. Why am I here? What is my purpose in life? What is my vocation? Themes of revenge, of forgiveness, of growth, emotional growth. All that is also part of the original manga. And now that I've seen the animated version, because I've already read the manga, and so I kind of know where the story will go, even beyond what is shown in this first season of the anime. I was impressed by how the anime series adds even more power to the story. They made some choices in the way it was filmed. There's a lot of symbolism in camera angles, in backgrounds, it's subtle details that I'm pretty sure a lot of people will miss. But I'm used to analyze stories, and I'm a visual kind of guy. I make my own documentaries, and so the language of cinematography is familiar to me, and And that is why I'm even more excited about the anime than I am about the manga, because the animated series does create moments in that story of, I think, of pure beauty. It's extremely well executed. So let's start this analysis after this introduction with a first look at the animation, the way this story was visualized. What I really like about Chainsaw Man is that they did not try to save money on the production. Of course, as you can imagine, a manga already takes a huge amount of work. Comic book artists are very, very hardworking people. But then turning that into a video and creating, what is it? Every episode was about 25 minutes long. There are 12 episodes. So that's about 6 hours of animation. And usually what you will see especially in cheaper animated versions of manga, is that they will use a lot of static frames, and they'll just move a static image over the screen because it's cheaper to do so than to animate every single frame. So in Neon Genesis Evangelion, for instance, if you remember, if you've seen that, that entire series was, at least the first initial series, was done on a shoestring budget compared to other series. And so they use a ton of shortcuts in the animation. And it feels, I mean, it's incredible what they've been able to do with such a small budget. But at the same time, it was also very constricting and very limiting to the animators, because especially towards the end, they actually ran out of money, and they still had to make the entire finale. Now, I think they came up with incredibly creative solutions to that, but it required them afterwards to come back to the story and retell it in a different way with a bigger budget. And then you're like, now we see what you actually wanted to make. Well, none of that is true for Chainsaw Man. They hired a company called, I think, MAPPA, MAPPA. They've done a ton of adaptations and series, so they had a very good reputation. But there wasn't the problem was not the money at all, because of the huge success already of the manga. They knew that this potentially had an audience of millions of fans. So I'm looking at the Wikipedia page of the animated series, and the creator, the original author of the manga, is Tatsuki Fujimoto, and he wrote and illustrated the entire manga. And that's already quite something. The one person creating this, I don't know how many episodes there are, but it's been running for a couple of years now. So he did all that by himself. And he also wanted to have a lot of control over the animation process. So when they were transferring this to the anime series, he was on top of that, making sure that it didn't skip on the quality and that it stayed close to the story. But I also see that the anime, and maybe that's also what made it so good, is that since Fujimoto was involved in the production of the anime series, he had a chance to improve on what was already there. And so I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of the extra beauty and quality of the anime is because this, for the author, was an occasion to go back to what he originally designed and wrote, and then think, well, how can we make this even better? Whereas usually, especially with a manga like this, you would think like, how can we do this in an affordable way? Because you can draw a still image of a fight between a huge monster and Chainsaw Man, but that's a still image. But now that we have to turn that into an anime, it has to move. We need to come up with a choreography, and that's where you get a lot of those static fights in cheaper and some older anime series where they just didn't have the budget yet because, well, it wasn't such a big thing. Right now, anime is a global phenomenon, and so there is money for this kind of stuff. But in the past, you would just animate, like, for instance, if Chainsaw Man would jump towards a monster, it would just be this one sprite, this one frame of a jump, and then it will just move statically over it towards another static image of the monster. None of that is the case here with Chainsaw Man. Every fight is extremely well choreographed. They used 3D models for background, but it all blends together really well. And especially the choreography of the fights is incredibly well done. And it sometimes blew me away, even though, again, it's very gory, it's very bloody, it's super violent. But it is very well done. You have to say that no matter what you think of this, the actual story, the quality is among the best I've ever seen in anime. The second thing that I really appreciated is the mood setting of the entire anime. The temptation when you're confronted with a story that is mostly focused on fights between these heroes, and I have to be careful with how to say that, because are they truly heroes? There are no true heroes in this story. Everybody is extremely flawed, but that's also why it's so interesting, because there are a lot of morally compromised people as main characters here, and it's all about change. It's how they grow, how they discover, and sometimes they will fall, and sometimes they will rise above themselves, and so there is a lot of material here for character dynamics. But what I loved about the way in which they did the anime is that even though you would think it's all about fighting and how can we make these battles as impressive as possible, in every episode there are moments where everything slows down and you get this beautiful, almost dreamy anime style where you see clouds and then the camera pans down and then you see either a city or some stories and some memories take place on the Japanese countryside, and it's gorgeous. And you hear the sound design of the anime is also really well done. So all of a sudden you will hear birds and you'll see this very peaceful landscape, and you get some glimpses of the background of some of these characters and what they went through. And then next beat is, but back to reality. There are demons here that need to be fought. There is a conflict going on. And then the conflict itself is never gratuitous. Even though we're used to the kind of the trope of an action hero, like, I don't know, a Bruce Willis type of hero, or Sylvester Stallone, he comes in with all these weapons and he saves the day and everybody lives happily forever after. That is absolutely not the case with Chainsaw Man. What makes the story so emotionally striking is the price that our heroes pay for their victory. And sometimes it is heart-wrenching because people die. No one is really safe. You aren't even sure that the people that we tend to think are classic good guys or good girls, that there's always a hint that, well, maybe you're wrong. Maybe you're actually being deceived. Maybe there is something bigger at play that you don't know yet. So should you really trust this person? And that is a big difference with kind of conventional Western storytelling, where it's very black and white usually. Think of Star Wars, where it's always the dark side versus the light side. George Lucas himself made it very clear. There is no gray there. Yes, people can make mistakes and they can fall to the dark side, but ultimately Star Wars is about redemption and forgiveness and coming back to the light side. And oftentimes in our Western fantasy and science fiction stories, with one exception, which I'll get to in a minute, but the good guys win, and everything is well at the end. Well, the one exception, of course, is horror or science fiction horror, like, for instance, Aliens. The whole Alien series, everybody dies except for Sigourney Weaver's character, and even she ultimately, well, gets her demise in a certain way. But here in this story, every episode, people die, and they are replaced with new heroes, and even the good guys and the good people do horrible things sometimes, and then it's up to you as a viewer, as someone who is watching this story unfold, to have your judgment about that. You have to think, do I actually like that? Is that a good decision? Would I do the same? And that makes it so much more interesting than a story that kind of takes you by the hand and tells you, you see that guy with the black mask and the red lightsaber? That's a bad guy, he's not going to stay alive. And there, that young farm boy, and he's so kind, and he's got that glitter in his eye, and he's looking at the sunset on Tatooine, and he's dreamy, and he's brave and courageous. Of course, he's going to be the hero of the story. He's going to win. And so it's oftentimes the moral of the story in Western storytelling is it's kind of spoon-fed to you. You don't have to do much thinking because the story will resolve itself, and at the end of the story, you'll feel good because the good guys won and the bad guys were defeated. This is one of the things that I like about Japanese anime. It's not as clean cut as that, and you, as someone who the story is told to, you are the one who gets to decide what to think of that and how you judge the characters and the story, and sometimes you can make mistakes as well in your evaluation. That's what I did when I was watching Chainsaw Man. In the first few episodes, I thought I knew where this was going. I was like, oh, I think, probably this main character is gonna evolve like this, and then he's gonna sacrifice himself, and then ultimately there will be a redemption, and of course all these demons will be defeated. Turns out I was very, very wrong. And even the presumption that I had that, of course, this main character, what's his name? Denji. He seems to be very superficial at first. Very, very superficial, very juvenile, almost a child in many ways. But I was like, okay, obviously that's how they position him in the beginning of the story, because he will start to learn and he will become wiser. And so I was already projecting on the story my own, the tropes that Western storytelling had taught me. And I was wrong. I was so often so wrong about these characters. And it doesn't mean that they don't evolve and that they don't learn, but at a different pace and in a different way often than I predicted. And that's why I'm so fascinated with this story. So animation is superb. Sound design, really good. The coloring, let's talk about the coloring. I love the kind of the pastel coloring that they use, and then oftentimes when everything gets gory, then for instance the blood and the violence gets super bright. So it's all about contrast also in colors and in pacing as well. So the editing is really good. I was watching the last episode just an hour ago, and it struck me, being an editor myself, that they sometimes have scenes where you would swear that they had multiple cameras filming a certain sequence, and that an editor afterwards was like, okay, I'm going to take this wide shot here, and then I'm going to insert this and that. But of course, in animation, that never happens. Everything is preconceived. You don't have multiple cameras filming something because nothing is filmed. And so the uncanny quality, I mean, I was very impressed at how much they use the visual language of conventional filmmaking, but then translate that to animation. I mean, I've rarely seen something as good as that. I'm sure most people won't even notice it, but it elevates the quality to such a high level that and I think that's subconsciously why a lot of people have latched onto this series and are so critically positive about it, because it just oozes quality and care. And then well, sound design I already talked about, and then the storytelling itself is extremely engaging. You never know what's going to happen the next week because this was rolled out over a couple of weeks, and so there are a lot of jumps in the story where you're like, oh wow, okay, I did not see that coming. And so and then there's always something happening that keeps you on your toes, like, oh, well, wait a minute, why did that happen? And so it doesn't spoon feed you. Even after watching the last episode of this first season, my immediate reaction was like, huh? Oh, that's a weird ending. Wait, why did they refer to that? I'll explain what I mean when I go through the episodes. But yeah, I was surprised, and then I thought about it a little bit, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, they're referring to what happened in, was it episode 3, and these memories, and then and this is a pretty fundamental question, of course, because it's a choice that the main character has made or has to make. Who does he want to be? So, and wait a minute, isn't that the core question of this entire first season? Who am I? Who do I want to be? What is fulfilling me and what is not? So it's like, wow, that is so masterful. But it took me literally 10 minutes to think about that ending. And then I was like, oh, I see what they do. That, to me, is storytelling quality. And with that, it is time to go through the story itself. For those of you that are not familiar with the premises of the story, this, of course, will be full of spoilers. So depending on, maybe you just want to check out my review and then watch it, or maybe you've already read the manga and seen the series and there's nothing surprising, or maybe you're not interested at all, but you still want to kind of get an idea of what the story is about. But know that there are going to be tons and tons of spoilers. So what is this story about? We meet the hero of the story, the titular character, Chainsaw Man. However, when we first meet him, he is just a 16-year-old boy, Denji, and he's not Chainsaw Man yet. In fact, he is now an orphan when we first get to know him. His father, turns out, had debts with the mafia, the local Japanese, Yakuza. And so his father was killed. And the Yakuza, the head, the boss of the Yakuza, is now transferring the debts of that father to his son Denji. And so Denji will have to somehow pay the debts of his father, or he will end up being killed as well. So that's already a very sad beginning of the story. Now, when he is visiting the tomb of his father, he encounters a small animal that looks a bit like a dog, but instead of, or it's like a cross between a dog and a mouse, but it has a nose in the shape of a chainsaw, and the tail is actually the pull, the string that you pull to activate the chainsaw. So you immediately know that this is not going to be a realistic story. Turns out this is actually a demon. And the whole concept of demons is different from what you may associate with the word if you have a Christian background or biblical idea of demon. These demons are not fallen angels per se, but they are more creatures of a spiritual nature that have a certain physical manifestation, and they are not part of our world, but they do interfere in our world. And some of these demons are evil, and some of them are not. And there is also a battle going on between the evil demons and then the humans who are trying to, of course, to survive all that violence, that demonic violence. And sometimes they will find in certain demons, they will find an ally who will give them extra powers. That is what happens with Denji, our titular character. He encounters this little creature, and at first it's just a pet. He's been raised in very, very poor conditions. So we see in some flashbacks that he has nothing to eat. He's wearing rags, lives in a dumpster, basically. And so this is the first time in his life that he has a friend. And a lot of those flashback scenes are very touching, where Denji is helping him, for instance, with a job, which is to mow down trees. So he sells the wood of the trees that he mows down with the chainsaw. The little creature is called Pochita. That's how they pronounce it in the Japanese dub. So Pochita. You could probably, I don't know what they say in English, maybe Pokita or Pochita, but I'll stick with the Japanese pronunciation. So Pochita is helping him, and then at one point he encounters demons. Like there's this big blobby creature that looks like a huge swollen tomato with tentacles and eyes, and then he activates the little chainsaw creature and defeats that demon, and then he goes to see the mob, the Yakuza, and tells them, "Hey, I can fight demons for you. If that will pay my debts, I will become your ally." And so he is sent to destroy the evil demons for the Yakuza, hoping that ultimately he will end up being a free man again. But then, unbeknownst to us, the Yakuza actually makes a deal with the zombie demon. And here, this is where these two storytelling worlds meet. So you've got this kind of Japanese story about Japanese demon and the mythology that you have in traditional Japanese stories about the supernatural world, and combined with the classic zombie stories that we know in our Western movies. And so these gangsters sell their souls or make a contract, which is a thing that happens all the time in this series. So they make a pact basically with these demons, with these zombie demons, and they turn into a zombie army. And then they realize that, wait a minute, now this chainsaw boy is a liability because he's killing demons. We just made a pact with the zombie demons, so he's going to end up killing us. So they try to kill the boy and his pet, Pochita, which actually is what happens. They lure him in a trap, and then they all turn into zombies, and they kill him. They rip him apart and literally throw him in a dumpster. And little Pochita is also in the dumpster and dying. And then the two form a bond, which had already happened once before. So the first time that Denji meets Pochita, he's actually hurt. He has some wounds. We don't know exactly how that happened. But Denji offers him a bit of his blood to heal him. And that is what happens also in Dumpster towards the end of the first episode. The blood of Denji mingles with the blood of Pochita, and they merge. And Pochita becomes the heart of Denji's new life. And so he rises from the dead steps out of this dumpster, pulls the string, which used to be the tail of Pochita, and turns into a living chainsaw. So basically his head turns into a huge chainsaw. Both his arms turn into chainsaws, and he obliterates the hundreds and hundreds of zombies that are attacking him again. And the episode ends with that. But for one small detail, a group of people enter the factory, the abandoned factory where all this takes place. And it turns out that this is a government organization that now wants to recruit Denji as one of their demon hunters. And this organization is led by Makima, who is a very pretty young woman with very peculiar eyes. That was something that I think will unfold later on, why she has eyes that we've also seen with demons and with some of the fiends that we will encounter in the next few episodes. So there is something not entirely human about her, which makes me a bit suspicious. But anyway, she recruits poor Denji and also embraces him. And immediately, since this is a 16-year-old boy who has never had a girlfriend, he falls in love, or he becomes infatuated with her. That brings us to episode 2, Arrival in Tokyo. And from here on, I will just read the short blurbs on Wikipedia, because otherwise it's going to be so hard to try to remember everything from each episode, because there's so much happening. And I will comment while I'm reading the synopsis from Wikipedia. So the first episode was called Dog and Chainsaw. The second episode is called Arrival in Tokyo. After eating in the rest area, Denji and Makima arrive at the Devil Hunters headquarters in Tokyo. By the way, little interjection here. This was one of the moments where I noticed that the anime went beyond the manga in adding subtle symbolism there. So you see Denji, who is still, covered in blood because of his fight with the zombies, and he's sitting in the car with Makima, and then they arrive at a toll booth. So part of the road ahead will require a price to be paid, and they stop there because Denji is hungry. This is not in the manga, or at least maybe the eating part may be there, but definitely not the toll booth. And so Denji wants to eat, and the whole fight has taken a lot of his energy, but he doesn't have any money. And he tells Makima, he says, I don't have anything to pay for this food. And then Makima is like, I will pay. I will feed you. And she almost cradles him like her own pet. She treats him like a dog, feeding him the ramen or whatever they order. And that is where I was like, I recognized the symbolism here. The toll booth is a symbol for the road ahead of his life. He is starting a new journey with this Makima, but they're not equals. She is paying for his debts. So instead of him having to pay the Yakuza for the debts of his father, now she pays for the food. But at the same time, that creates also a power relationship. She has the money. She has the rewards. He is on a leash, on a symbolic leash. And if he wants to continue on the road, there is going to be a price that he will have to pay. She seems to be the one who pays for his food. He's going to have to pay her back. He's now in debt to her, as he was in debt with the Yakuza. And this theory of mine was confirmed almost immediately afterwards and throughout the entire season. But there was such a genius detail. They don't explain it. They don't overemphasize it. But if you watch it, you're like, oh, I see what they did there. Anyway, so she brings him to the Devil Hunter headquarters in Tokyo. By the way, this is taking place in a parallel history, so it's not our world. For instance, in this I know from the manga, this world, for instance, knows almost no war. There are a lot of demons, but for instance, the Second World War never took place. There are no armies in the world, and all this. There's a huge mythology underneath that we don't even realize during this first season, but it will be shown to us much later on in the story. Anyway, Denji wishes to team up with Makima because he's infatuated with her. She's such a pretty girl. But she introduces him to Aki Hayakawa. And he too becomes a fundamental character in the first season. So Aki is tasked with becoming basically the trainer of Denji, and there is immediate dislike between the two. Aki is like, seriously, that guy? And Aki is also a public safety devil hunter, but they get into a fight during the patrol, and Aki tells Denji that he should just quit because he's not up to the task. Aki is an experienced demon hunter, and he immediately sees that Denji is extremely superficial, is only in it for the reward of being acknowledged by Makima. He's extremely juvenile in his likes and dislikes, whereas Aki clearly has gone through a lot of stuff in his life, and he's like, I am not going to to babysit this boy. Denji thinks, being just this pretty simple boy, that Aki is just jealous of Denji because he has a crush on Makima. But of course, none of that is the case. Denji and Aki return to Makima, where she tells them that they have to work together. They just had a huge fight, but Makima says, no, you got to work together. Figure it out. The next day, Denji and Aki are on a mission as they spot a fiend whom Denji kills using an axe. So a fiend is this is kind of part of the mythology of this series. So you've got these demons, these evil demons, and they're in hell. But sometimes they will cross over to our world, and they will either manifest as a proper demon, and sometimes they will have a pact with a human accomplice. But sometimes they will take over the body of a human being, someone that they killed, for instance. And sometimes it can even be that that person is still kind of half alive. And if there is a good match, if there is balance between the demon aspect and the human aspect, they can turn into fiends. So they're not really human anymore. They can be extremely dangerous because it has all the powers that these demons have. But in this case, some of these fiends, like Power, that's the name of the girl who is joining the team, they work for the devil hunters, even though they themselves are also demons. But before I'm getting ahead of myself, the fiend that Denji kills is actually just a guy who has been possessed by a demon, and it's the first assignment for Aki and Denji as a team, and then Aki is a bit surprised that Denji doesn't turn himself into a chainsaw. And Denji says, well, it wasn't really necessary. And I felt sorry for this guy. And so I just used my axe, which is still pretty gruesome. But anyway, and then Aki is like, but you're crazy. These aren't humans. This is also, of course, explaining to us that we shouldn't have feelings of pity for these possessed fiends that our heroes are killing, because they are evil. You don't have to show mercy. In fact, if you show mercy, they will only take advantage of it to kill you. So next time don't. And then it turns out, ultimately, and this is the end of the episode, or more or less, that Denji did this because the guy had dirty magazines in his apartment, and Denji has never seen those, and so he wants to make sure that there's no blood on the dirty magazines, and he takes some of them home. And it's like that's the first time where I was okay. So yeah, this is not an easy redemption story. This is really a juvenile, superficial guy. Very much like the things that make him happy in life are not the higher values that a regular hero would aspire to. No, it's in his life, it's about food and having a nice warm bed and girls. And then not friends, not girlfriends, no, just infatuation, lust, it's like super basic juvenile desires. Not what I expected, but of course it was only the beginning of the story. But this also explains why Aki is so disgusted by Denji. It's like, oh, come on, get over it. We are in serious business. The future of mankind is at stake, and the only thing you can think of is pretty girls and food and a bed to sleep in. Come on. So Denji then, when he sees the dirty magazines, has his first goal in life. And it's basically to fondle a girl. That is what he sets himself as like the carrot that pulls him forward. Again, this is not what I expected. And it's a bit awkward. You're like, oh, are they really going there with this story? But it shows how much Denji, and we see this in flashbacks, is ravenous because he didn't have any normal experiences in his life. So he is extremely immature because he never had a normal childhood. He didn't have parents that helped him to grow. He didn't have any friends. His only friend in life was this chainsaw dog. And so you can tell that he's just emotionally thwarted. He never grew up. And so he's still reacting as a boy. Thankfully, of course, the story is not about that. And that's where the other characters are so important. They counterbalance that because there are adults in the room as well. There are other characters that have gone through a lot and that know that life is about more than this kind of stuff. You just don't expect the titular character to be this shallow, but he is. Then back in the headquarters, Makima introduces them to Power, who is this other girl. She has little red horns to indicate that she's actually a fiend, so possessed by another devil, or she has a contract with a devil. And then they explain what a fiend is, and then Denji has to take Power under his wings. So now Denji has an apprentice in a certain way, but Power is very, very hard to tame. She has her own mind. She too is extremely shallow and very impulsive and not at all an adult. And maybe that's why these two kind of have a natural bond. It's a boy and a girl, and they're both extremely juvenile, extremely shallow, and that's what they have in common, even though they often get into quarrels with one another. Then they are tasked to kill another devil, the sea cucumber devil. I'm not making this up. And then even though Denji knows that Power is super impulsive, he cannot restrain her, and so she jumps onto the sea cucumber devil and kills it in a gruesome way. And that's the end of the episode. Episode 3, this is where it gets a bit more convoluted, and also this was the first big story twist. The episode is called Meowi's Whereabouts, and Meowi is a cat. It's an onomatopoeia, is that the word? Like meow, meowie. So where is Meowi? This is the summary. The resultant killing of the sea cucumber devil attracts public attention while Denji and Power start accusing each other when they are stopped by Makima. She tells them to work together and to not and not to fall for more risks. In an attempt to get along with Power, Denji starts to flirt, which is sensed by Power. She tells him to defeat the Bat Devil, which has kidnapped her pet cat, Meowie, in exchange for allowing Denji to touch her, to fondle her. Agreeing, Denji gets a leave sanction for both of them for some hours to track and kill the devil. They both travel to an abandoned house where Power knocks Denji unconscious, revealing her intention to feed him to the devil to heal his injury. So this gigantic monstrous bat, she wants to use Denji to heal that devil because that's the price that the devil requires to release her cat. So she wants to sacrifice Denji in order to get back her cat. Bat Devil then squishes blood out of Denji, but getting a bad taste of it, because of course Denji is not just human, he refuses to release the cat and instead swallows the cat and Power and heads towards the city for more feed. He wants to eat more humans that taste better than these two, devil-infested creatures that he just ate. Denji survives and gets hold of him and crashes him in the city after bringing out the chainsaws, but he is overpowered after a long fight. Having a promise bonding by Power, he kills off the devil by ripping through his stomach and then frees Power and Meowie. Isn't that crazy? So this was the first thing. I did not expect that to happen, that the Power betrays Denji, and then Denji still goes on to save her and to save the cat. Not because he's a good guy, not because he's an hero, but because he knows that if he saves the cat, she will allow him to fondle her. Come on. Really? This episode, I was like, am I going to watch the rest of this season? This is too much. Come on. This is a series that is made for, 14-year-old boys. But I was wrong. There's much more to this. Episode 4, called Rescue. After defeating the Bat Devil, a surviving Power, so Power survives, of course, is left stunned at Denji's tenacity and gives him permission to fondle her. And this is interesting. It's a very awkward scene. So this is not family-friendly stuff. But anyway, there's no nudity, but there is definitely, it's a bit raunchy. But the moment when he's doing that, the Leech Devil suddenly arrives, severing Denji's arm and eating it. Yuck. Denji tries to transform into the Chainsaw Man, but his lack of blood from the previous fight prevents a full transformation, growing only a small chainsaw on his head. Even still, Denji pushes forward with his dream in mind, fondling the girl, and battles Leech, inflicting her some damage. However, he is overpowered and he is about to be killed. However, at that moment, Aki, so that's the guy who was charged by Makima to team up with Denji and to teach him some lessons, he arrives at the scene and obliterates the Leech with a massive fox devil. So he's able to conjure this huge, monstrous fox who then eats the Leech Devil, who's also gigantic. This all takes place in the midst of a big, sprawling city. So it feels a bit like, like King Kong versus Godzilla or something like that. So anyway, Aki saves the day. And in the debriefing, Aki explains that he managed to reattach Denji's arm after a blood transfusion and explains about the Fox Devil and tells us that he has a contract with the Fox Devil. So Aki too has a contract with this devil that he can conjure up. But of course he too has a price to pay. Turns out every time he conjures up that devil, he loses years of his life. So he made and this is only afterwards that we realize that, he sacrificed literally years of his life to save this Denji, this stupid boy that he really loathes because he's so simple-minded. But he does it anyway. So Aki here is actually more of a classic hero, very selfless in what he does here. We also learned that Denji is able to heal from almost anything. He's indestructible, and every time he loses limbs, they will regrow or reattach themselves. Thankfully for us, otherwise this would be a very short series. Aki then says that both Denji and Power may be disposed of, but offers Denji compliance to his rules in exchange for saving them. Denji agrees, so Aki gets Makima's approval in keeping them alive. However, this means that Power now resides in Aki's apartment as well, resulting, of course, in chaos, because now he doesn't have one kid to take care of and to feed, but there's the other kid as well, and they both are terrible housemates. So it's a total nightmare. That night, Power sticks to her promise with Denji, much to his delight. And this is where there is an interesting moral aspect to this whole fondling thing, which you could, it made me feel a bit uncomfortable. I was like, is this the message that this story is trying to tell? That it's all, that lust is rewarded? But the actual moral of the story comes later, when Denji finally has his dream, come true. And then he's like, so that's it? But that was nothing, And he realizes that what he had told himself, that this is the ultimate reward, it's once you have the reward, there's no more value in it. And that is an interesting moral story to tell there. And so then you would think, I think, as a priest, so now he's finally going to repent, he's going to better his life, and for him, he will now forego all these juvenile feelings of lust, etc., and he will be a true hero, and it's only going to be about true love for him. No. I overestimated Denji. He is like, okay, so this fondling was not totally it. I'll just go for the next girl. And he chooses another superficial goal to aim for. It's crazy. Episode 4, Rescue. This is taking a bit longer than I thought, so my apologies. Maybe I'll do half of the episodes today, and then I'll do the second half of the first season next week, because otherwise we're going to be sitting here for 3 hours. How many episodes were there in total? We had 12 episodes. So yeah, we'll do 6 now. That maybe if you haven't seen the series yet, you can still catch on before next week. All right, episode 4, called Rescue. Oh no, I already did that. Episode 5, Gun Devil. This is going to be important. The Gun Devil is proving to be one of the most dangerous demons in the world. And I think it's also a metaphor for gun violence. But again, they're not beating us over the head with this, but it's implied. And it's up to us to conclude that and to, we can think about it, what we think. Denji's experience of fondling Power is underwhelming. Something that Makima insists is a result of him not knowing his partner well enough. She then proceeds to tease Denji and allows him to touch her, rendering him speechless. She then offers to grant him any wish he wants if he kills the Gun Devil, a powerful beast responsible for more than 1 million deaths, including Aki's family. Now, this is we see this in a flashback, which at first I didn't realize was about Aki. So we see this young boy and his brother. Aki is the older brother, and Aki wants to go play outside. It's I think it's snowing, but Aki's younger brother is a bit weak, sick. He's in bed, and his parents are reading a story to him. And the story is an existing story about 2 mice. One mouse lives on the countryside, and the other mouse lives in the city. The mouse that lives on the countryside lives this is not in the anime, but this is how the original story goes. The original fairy tale shows us basically 2 lifestyles. The one mouse lives on the countryside, but he doesn't get to see much He lives a very simple life, eats simple food, and his life is very quiet and peaceful. The other mouse lives in the city, where he's constantly threatened by big cats and other dangers and cars and whatnot. But his life is super exciting. It's very dangerous, but it's also thrilling. And there is also incredible food, because the mouse can just go to all these different restaurants and rummage through the discarded food there. So the question of the story is, of course, which mouse do you want to be? Do you want to be a country mouse, or do you want to be a city mouse? And this is also a bit maybe a metaphor for the two brothers. You've got the older brother, Aki, who wants to go outside. He wants to play. He thinks that life is about excitement and adventure. And then you've got the little brother who's in bed, who is sick, and he's just there with his parents reading stupid stories. And so Aki is very dismissive of his younger brother. He's like, oh, I'm going to play outside. And ultimately, his younger brother tries to follow him. And then he sends his younger brother home. He's like, just go home to your parents. I'm going to be outside here by myself. And then his younger brother is a bit disappointed, goes back to his parents. And at that moment, the gun devil strikes. And the entire town is obliterated. The house in front, and Aki is seeing this, is traumatizing him for the rest of his life. The house with his younger brother and his parents is obliterated by the gun devil that day. And it's not just that town. The entire country is obliterated. More than 1 million people die because of the violence of the gun devil. And this flashback shows us why Aki is a demon hunter. He wants to fight the demon that did this to his brother and to his parents. And he is forced now to live as a city mouse, but he doesn't want it anymore. He wants a quiet life, but he can't, because he has vowed to take revenge and to obliterate this gun devil forever, once and forever. And this is also why I think he is so critical of Denji. Because in Denji, he sees himself. He sees his younger self. He once was like Denji, craving adventure, craving the good life and everything. But he has learned that that road ultimately could lead to you losing everything. His younger self didn't value the quiet life on the countryside, didn't value the presence of his parents, because he felt that he needed to be outside and have adventures. And then it's after that quiet life was taken away from him that he realized how much he valued it. And so his life is all about losing the people that he truly cares for, and with whom he feels safe. And so when he's so strict with Denji, it's actually because he's berating his younger self. That is behind that whole story arc between these two brothers. I need to do a TikTok video about this, because I think it's extremely powerful storytelling here. So, back to this whole gun devil thing. And then, of course, Makima you can tell that she's not honest here. She has found another way to put Denji on an even stronger leash, because now it's not just about food that she provides for him. It's not just about having a house and a bed. No. She knows that Denji is disappointed by his first sensual experience, and so she's like, well, you can do anything with me as a reward if only you help me with, defeating the gun devil. So she is playing with these immature feelings of this boy, and you can tell that it's not genuine. At least I was like, I don't trust her. She's playing him. And of course, Denji, being stupid and 16 years old, he's like, I can do anything with you? Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. So, the gun devil. Using a chunk from the gun devil lightly magnetized to other fragments, public safety discovers that there is a devil hiding in a hotel and sends Aki's team, consisting of Denji, Power, Aki's longtime friend Himeno, and Kobeni is very timid. A young girl is afraid of everything. And the headstrong Hirokazu Arai to neutralize that demon. So we learn that the fragments of this gun devil are also integrated into other devils. But these fragments attract each other. Again, I think it's a metaphor. Violence attracts violence. The parts of the gun devil will seek out other parts, and evil and violence has a tendency to group, to become stronger, and to become even more destructive. So there's a bit of a moral metaphor there. Anyway, so this fragment that they now have of the gun devil, I think they got it from the bat devil in the previous episode. It leads to this hotel. This is where it gets very interesting. So they send in this team, and to motivate the rookies, Himeno, who is Aki's friend. We don't know much about them, but they clearly have a relationship. But then she motivates the rookies by offering a kiss on the cheek to whomever slays the devil first. And then she even tells Denji, if you defeat that demon, I will kiss you on the mouth. I will. It will be amazing. And of course, Denji, being stupid and young, is like, oh, yes, I will go and I will defeat that devil. All the women here in the story are manipulating poor Denji. But he's not poor. He's just stupid. He needs to learn a lot. Before they enter the hotel, Aki remembers when he first met Himeno in a massive graveyard for the gun devil's victims, with her proclaiming her previous 5 partners had all died and asked him to stay alive. So we get in this flashback, we see that their relationship is not just a romantic relationship. No. Aki once was Himeno's pupil, just like Aki now is the tutor of Denji. And so Himeno, this young woman, has seen the destruction and the violence of the gun devil because she's lost all her previous pupils to this gun devil. And now Aki, she's afraid that she will also lose Aki. And Aki in the flashbacks is still about Denji's age. But of course, he's gone through so much more than Denji. Aki is almost oblivious of Himeno's fascination with him, because he only wants revenge. He wants to kill that demon who killed his family. So Himeno is afraid to lose Aki. This is one of the recurring themes in Chainsaw Man. It's the fear of losing the people that you love. And of course, who does that? The demons do that. So demons destroy relationship. Demons destroy love. And this is where the story gets to a higher level. And the story is good as it is, but it's also a fairy tale. It's also talking about, what is destroying our lives. It's not just violence. No, it's violence that kills relationships. And so if we fight demons, what we're actually doing is to try to hold on to the people that we love. It's trying to protect relationships. That's why we should fight evil. Not because it's gruesome monsters. No, we fight because we want to protect. Then they go to the 8th level of the hotel, and they find a walking head. It's a severed head, but it's still alive. And then Power steps forward and slashes the head in two. And then Himeno reveals that she too has a contract with the devil, namely the Ghost Devil. And that Ghost Devil allows her to use a powerful invisible hand. So she can conjure up that devil, just like Aki was able to conjure up the gigantic monstrous fox. She can conjure up an invisible hand. However, they then, at the end of the episode, realize that they are trapped on that 8th floor. There is no exit. This is what brings us to episode 6, the final one that I'm going to review here in this hour. And the episode is called Kill Denji, and it's the end of the hotel story arc. The Devil Hunters look for a way to escape from that 8th floor of the hotel. But Aki notices that all the clocks on the floor have stopped completely. They have been completely cut off from the outside world. In fact, they even try to escape by going up the stairs. And when they go up the stairs, they enter the same floor from the stairs from below. And if they step out of a window, the reflection is not just a reflection of the room they're in. No, it's the mirror version of that room. And they walk into the corridor, and then everybody's still there. And then they go into the room, go through the window, and it's the same room. And it's like this, there's something going on here. There is no escape. But, of course, they still need to eat. And even though the clocks have stopped, for them, the time is ticking because they're getting hungry and they need to somehow survive. I love this episode. It's so claustrophobic and you feel like there is no way out. This is the first time that these rookies are faced with a situation that they have no solution for. And violence is apparently not the solution. They need to kind of think their way out of this. They now are trying to they start to collect resources to survive. They want to eat, but then Denji's eating a lot of the food and then he just goes to sleep. He's like, whatever, figure it out. I like these hotel beds. I'm just going to sleep. Bye. And then he's gone. But Denji at one point notices that Himeno is smoking the same brand of cigarettes as Aki. So Himeno and Aki was, tutor and pupil, but they both smoked the same cigarettes. And then Himeno reveals that it was her who made him begin smoking after he avenged her from the angry girlfriend of one of her deceased partners who slapped her. She also reveals that she knows Aki wants to live a long life despite being a devil hunter. Aki returns to the room and reveals the previous devil they killed has now grown larger. So let me comment on that flashback with the cigarettes. This is going to be more important later on. But it shows a little bit more of the evolving relationship between Himeno and Aki. So Aki is still underage. I think he's 16 when he becomes the pupil of Himeno, who is maybe 20 or something like that. She is infatuated with him, but at the same time, she doesn't realize that he's still underage. And so she notices that Aki is extremely reserved. She doesn't know the trauma that he went through, losing his parents and his younger brother. And so she tries to warm him up a little bit. And so she gives him good food and she's super kind to him, even a bit flirty, but he doesn't react. And then she's like, well, loosen up, and he's like, well, you shouldn't smoke. Smoke is going to destroy your lungs, it's going to destroy your life. And she's like, oh, come on, just try out this cigarette. And that's when he tells her, but I'm 16 years old, I'm underage, and I'm not allowed to smoke. And she's like, okay. She steps back a little bit. But ultimately, apparently, she did manage him to get addicted to that same brand of cigarettes. How exactly, that's for later. They don't reveal it right now. But you can tell that there's been a bit of a closeness growing between the two. So we too, of course, are still slowly starting to understand why Aki is behaving the way he is. All that is like some of the characters in the story are proxies for us. We also don't understand Aki, but it's through by seeing what Himeno discovers about him that we also learn about Aki. So they killed the severed head. Now it is all of a sudden there's this monstrous blob in the corridor with multiple heads and very violent. And And this monstrous mass of flesh makes himself known as the Eternity Devil. Means that you cannot kill him. That devil is eternal, just as their situation basically seems like an eternal hell from which there is no escape. However, he offers them a deal. He says, I will give you freedom. I will let you escape from this hotel and from this floor if you feed Denji to me, because we need his heart. And this is intriguing. Why do they need Denji? He's just a boy. They could take any of the other demon hunters as a price to pay, but they're after Denji. And this is going to be like the how do you say, the main thread of the rest of the story. It's like all these demons for some reason want to get hold of Denji's heart. What's so special about that heart? We don't know yet. The Eternity Devil also says, you cannot kill me because my heart is on another floor and you cannot go there. Haha. So you will have to sacrifice Denji. But Denji, of course, and the rest of the gang, they're supposed to support one another. What are they going to do? This is a dilemma. Are they going to sacrifice the life of Denji to save their own lives or not? Interesting dilemma. Kobeni, who is this very shy girl and always almost on the verge of crying, she now attacks Denji. She turns out to be very ruthless and pragmatic. And she's like, okay, if I want to save my life, I need to kill Denji. I'll just kill Denji. So she attacks Denji, but Himeno and Aki defend him, stating that they won't kill him. Time passes, and as Kobeni and Arai's fear keeps growing, so Arai is the other guy, I think, they are also a pair. They think we're never going to get out of here. But the more they are afraid of that, the bigger the devil becomes. And then he flips the entire floor vertically. And this is part of the underlying mythology of Chainsaw Man. Turns out that the devils become more and more powerful the more they are confronted with fear. And so fear is actually the food for these demons. So that's an interesting concept. That these devils are in fact the materialization, the physical manifestation of the fear. Maybe it's more than that, but the greater the fear, the stronger the demon. Of course, there's someone who is not afraid because he's too stupid for it. And that is Denji. He knows no fear because he has already lost his life. You know, he is a simple guy. He doesn't overthink things. So what is going to happen? Maybe he is the only one that can defeat this devil because he's the only one of the entire team that has no fear. A desperate Kobeni charges towards Denji with a knife, but Aki intervenes and gets stabbed instead, devastating Himeno. So again, Aki sacrifices himself for the second time here to save Denji. Himeno is devastated because she has a crush on Aki. She doesn't want to lose yet another pupil. While Power tries to stop Denji's bleeding, Denji then deduces that the devil is actually afraid of him, of his chainsaws. And that's what he does. That's what liberates him. He realizes that I'm not afraid. The devil is afraid of me. So I am going to turn on my chainsaw and I am ready to shred this entire devil. And he leaps into its mouth. End of the episode. Tum, tum, tum. Well, if you don't know what the series was about, I hope that my review has at least given you the idea that there is more to this story than just the gore and the lust and all the evil stuff. And I know that a lot of people would take issue with me defending this series. Like, there's this priest and he is into this kind of stuff, but I hope that by explaining what I think is truly at stake in this story and how this story is a metaphor, it's a fairy tale, it's a mirror, and it wants us to think about the moral issues here, and that not everybody in the story is the same. Like, Aki is very critical of Denji in the same way that we are also. I am definitely critical of the superficiality of Denji and the moral choices that he makes. That is why this is such a fascinating story. And this is why I do want to, next week, dive into the second half of this season, because there's so much more going on of which you have no idea yet. I didn't have an idea. And the more you discover, the more you start to understand what happens in the story up until this moment. I would love to hear your thoughts as well. I hope you enjoyed this. What I'm going to try to do is to create a few TikToks in the next couple of days based on this analysis. This sharing this with you has given me a couple of ideas, like, oh, I could do a short video about this and about this and about this. I will also post those on my YouTube site or my YouTube channel, which is Father Roderick. And I hope that it will find an audience, because I don't think this kind of approach to anime can be found much. I see a lot of videos of fans of these stories, but I think that there is more to explore in these anime series, at least in some of them, and so I hope that I'm contributing something to the anime world, and maybe also to the fans of the manga. Hopefully that'll make them think a little bit more about these stories that they like so much, but maybe are not really sure why they actually like these stories. All right, that wraps it up for me. Thank you so much for the privilege of your time. I will talk to you soon with part 2 of my analysis of Chainsaw Man, and thanks for listening.